Hello and welcome to the She the People Online Summit. Over 2 days, some fantastic speakers touching upon various issues, not just what's happening in our times of coronavirus, but also how everyone's using to unleash this lockdown into something meaningful, whether to rejuvenate, rethink, or to simply relax. With me, somebody we haven't seen in a while, and it's just fantastic to reconnect with the lovely Gurmehar Kaur, who's joining us live from Oxford, where she is in social isolation with books and
With books.
with strong coffee.
Hi, Sherry. It's so nice to meet you. It's been a very long time. It's so nice to reconnect again. I
That's
feel it feels like I'm back home.
what are you up to?
Currently I am in a lockdown with in my student hall with the entire student community. So it's not as lonely as it could have been, which I'm very glad about. But in life, I'm doing my masters, which I should finish by September, and that's about it.
And then you'll make your way back to India. What are your big plans?
100%. I definitely am very sure about coming back to India. I'm not very sure if it's immediately right after my masters. I do want to work a little bit, get some on ground work experience, and then head back. But home is where I will be.
Fantastic. Actually, let's start talking about that. You mentioned that you're sort of locked down in Oxford.
Yeah.
As a young student, and now somebody who's sort of soon going to be into into a stream of career. What
Yeah.
are you using this lockdown for, Gurmehar?
As a student, so I do have a couple of assignments that are due in a couple of weeks. Those are something that I'm looking at, that I'm working towards. But this lockdown has been, I have to address the fact that this lockdown has been very hard on a lot of people because we've been so used to of going to the libraries, going to social spaces, having conversations with people, discussing your work. I think when you take away an access to libraries and books where most of the material that we work with is located in, it becomes extremely difficult to get the work it becomes extremely difficult to get your academic work done. And then when there's that problem, there's also a whole emotional I think there's also another whole emotional layer to it where you're in the middle of this pandemic, and then the thought of finishing an essay, it just feels very futile, so you don't want to do it. Every day I wake up and I'm like, I don't know what I'm waking up to. I don't My schedule's a bit off. I'm in my room. I don't want to get out of my bed. So I think if there's any young student who's out there, I do want to say it out loud, and if it gives anyone any comfort, that's extremely, if you're finding it difficult to get into the rhythm of work because of how how your personal life has shifted, and uh, it can be to how emotionally draining it can be to recognize that a lot of people in the world are that a lot of people in the world do not to also recognize that don't have the kind of privileges that you have, and to live with that feeling, and to live with that thought in your thought in your mind and your heart. It's okay to take your time and get back into the
It's okay to be the
rhythm of
student.
things.
It's okay to
Yeah,
relax. It's okay to find ways to unwind and open
for
up your
sure.
mind. Okay, so let me talk to you what we want to talk to you about, which is really the power of change that youth today have.
Mhm.
In India, of course, we've heard the word demographic dividend for like yonks, but
Yeah.
most importantly, today we can see the voice of youth. We hear it, we see it on social media, we see them
Mhm.
on the streets, we've seen them
Mhm.
in the course of the last few months, shall I say. And it's a collective voice. They
Yeah.
all want change, they all want equality, they all want peace, they all want
Yeah.
secularism. I just want you to give a sense of the power today youth have
Mhm.
and how
Mhm.
that's being sort of made, that's making connections all over the world.
Yeah. I think something that this current situation really made me think about was the importance of technology in the world that we're living in. And it's something that all of us people who've been in activism across Delhi, across India, all the young people who've been voicing their opinions have used, like, technology, social media as a tool to amplify voices. And I think now is the moment that it really hits you how important the virtual has become to your everyday normal life. Now that we can't even access our streets, now that we can't even move out of the house, the we've fallen back into living in a very virtual space. And I think why and where youth becomes extremely important here is that this is something that we, like our generation, our demographic, has grown up into. We've already used these tools. We know, work from home. We've been Our generation has been freelancing. Our generation has been on social media, being, in their part time. uh, if not fully, if they've always been into activism. We've always created content, and when I say created content, it doesn't always mean political, but any kind of content for entertainment, uh, for arts, for literature, and of course for politics. And I think this is the moment. It's a very special moment in life when it comes to how youth can drive change, because at this point we're spearheading this virtual reality the world is living in, and we're the one who is comfortable in this space. um, and it really comes down on our shoulders of how we use the space that we're so familiar with, which is the virtual space, to make sure that lives on ground and are impacted in a positive way. And it could be through crowdfunding, it could be through fake news busting, because that's something that's extremely important right now,
Yeah.
because of the amount of panic there is in the world.
That's true. So, I think it's really it's relevant that you bring that up because
Mhm.
today we are talking about a pandemic, and we are also talking about being a completely different generation, whether it's Gen Z or the millennials.
Mhm.
We are also talking about the fact that today you can use technology to
Yeah.
learn, you can use technology to train, and
Mhm.
for whatever it's worth, I find it absolutely amazing that young people around the world are
Mhm.
offering themselves, their learnings, their services to see
Yeah.
how they can help the community at large.
Yeah.
Because this is a good time for people to learn. It's a good time for people to share things
Yeah.
that they don't have time for most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I would 100% agree with that. And and I think And I think, especially when it comes down to India, and I do want to go back because the youth across the world is doing it. But I think, especially when it comes back to India, we do make a large amount. We do make 60% of the population at this point. India is a very young country when it comes down to demographics. So, the way we handle this situation right now is what you're going to see in is what you're going to see in the future. And I think this moment is a huge test of how we as a society and how we as young people take this opportunity. Not, I wouldn't say opportunity, I think that's the wrong word, sorry, but we would take this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would take this moment and shape what the future is going to look like. And it's a very uncertain time that we're living in. We don't know how we're going to come out of this uh, this how we're going to deal with the trauma and the fear that this is instilled in everyone's heart.
Yeah.
But it fully depends on the youth at this point,
Yeah.
of how of how we're spearheading the movements. Yeah.
True. And in this period of spending time at Oxford, especially in your
Mhm.
political leanings, social and activist leanings, let me put it
Mhm.
that way, where do you think you've gone from the time you entered there? How do you feel about your desire on
Mhm.
the small acts of freedom, the desire to change, the world as a young person? Because
Yeah.
the reason I'm asking you that, and I know it's a bit of a lofty question, but the truth is that today this pandemic and many other political moves around
Mhm.
the world, which have been traditionally towards the right, uh,
Yeah.
have changed the world as we know it.
Yeah. Yeah. um I think I would break this question into two parts, which would be how my political leanings have been impacted while coming here. I think I came here with a very straight agenda on my mind, that I was going to focus on my academic groundings, uh, so I could go back to India and know exactly the kind of work I want to do. For the last year, I personally have only been focusing on feeding myself information, feeding myself ideas, and feeding myself thoughts, so I could grow from them, and then bring it down to my work. But talking about the pandemic, would you repeat the last bit of the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying from the point of view that this pandemic is going to change a lot for everybody.
Yeah.
Uh, the countries today are justifying closing their borders. Just a short while ago, they were justifying this about people and the kind of communities they belong to or the
Yeah.
religion they belong to.
Yeah.
Today, we're talking about a scenario which has sort of been a pandemic over an
Mhm.
already very strong protest. I mean, this is likely to be a bit of a death knell at
Yeah.
any voice of reason, so to speak, in the future, or
Yeah.
suddenly threaten that voice.
I think there are two ways to look at it. There's one section of the society that would always give that those arguments, but there's completely another that says, but there's completely another perspective to look at, which is that where this is pandemic makes you realize how interdependent we are, that you cannot just close borders, that whether it's our healthcare, whether it's our travel, whether it's like, if anything, this is the moment that shows you how interdependent as a world we are on each other, and how closing borders seems like a very nice seems like a very ideal idea had we closed borders before. But we have closed our borders right now, but look what's happening. There's no people, like your businesses are in trouble, education is in trouble, young students uh, are locked away from home because the borders have closed. No one knows what the future holds. And I think more than anything, I think this moment is the exact opposite of that. This moment is a realization that the world cannot survive in isolation. If anything, we need contact. We need each other to keep going.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely the opposite of social isolation. I think people have never wanted each other as much as they do now.
As they do now, for sure.
In a very crowded country like India, 1.3 billion people. But you have been at the crossroads of being woman,
Mhm.
writer, and
Yeah.
a political person
Yeah.
by nature of your activism.
Mhm.
How do those three meet at the crossroads?
In life or in this moment?
Yeah,
In life.
right. They're three different identities for you, right?
100%, 100%. But I think I've never seen them as three different identities. I don't think. I think because we live in this world where everyone there's a sense of wanting to identify with something. But and while I've always had it for a very long time to identify, um, I wouldn't see all these identities as any different. I think at any given point, any person, whether they work in an office, whether they are a student, whether they are whether they in whatever gender they identify with, I think there's always a bit of I think there's always a bit of you cannot live in a world where you're not an activist, where you're not a political person.
Um,
Am I making sense here? Like
yeah,
there,
that's true. So
you
that,
can't,
yeah,
these, your identities can't be in isolation with each other. It's who you are. It's what you bring to the table. And I think sometimes your identity. I think that's where your politics often also comes from. So just
yeah.
to I wouldn't box being an activist, being a writer, and being a woman as differently. My activism, my writing would not. I wouldn't have anything to write if I wasn't an activist, and I wouldn't have anything to talk about felt the if I hadn't felt the oppressions that a woman feels in everyday life.
The anger of activism. So,
Yeah.
so how do you play between the power and the risk of being somebody who raises a voice? I mean, since 2017,
Mm-hmm.
to now, you have become a name that everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and initially inadvertently. So, how have you dealt with the idea of power and risk, because they come as both sides of one coin?
I think I've had like, this year has been a lot of thinking about just that. How do you deal with the risk and power? Uh, and I've often wondered that maybe my life would have been mildly easier, mildly nicer had I not been so vocal. And the world, and especially in India, the moment that we're living in right now, with the current government, with the CAA, with all the things that have been rolling out one by one, uh, it feels like it's better to keep quiet. You know, it's better to like go back into your life. But this is something I realized that you have to take a risk here because you're not taking a risk for yourself. You're taking a risk for your future generations. You're taking a risk if you do not speak now, if you do not take the burden, you do not take the responsibility of speaking to the power, then you're setting a very it's a very dangerous then you're feeding into this then you're feeding into this space where you're creating a very dangerous space for anyone who's going to come after you. And as young people, as young people, I'm 23 years old. I hope I have another 40 years to live. So what I do now will define my 40 years as a human being, as an Indian. And I think the risk is inevitable. You have to take it. If you don't take the risk, if you don't speak up, if you do not voice what's in your mind, if you do not call out what's wrong in the society right now, then you have to live with it for 40 years. And I think it's a decision you have to make. Do you take a risk now, or do you keep quiet and stay quiet for the rest of your life?
Yeah. Who stands behind you when you speak this person, when you speak as this person? I know
Mhm.
it's a question, and I know you've had a lot of personal hardship. I also know that you were stay with your mom and sister.
Yeah.
When you wanted to raise this over the last few years in India, the voice of a young female activist,
Yeah.
where did you look to for support? And did the community also come out there? The young
Mhm.
women and men that you study
Mhm.
with, did they come out there to support you?
And and since I wanted to say, oh, I have a great support system. My mother's there, my sister's there. I have great friends. But to be honest, I don't come from a household where activism is an everyday thing. What I say scares my mother way more than it scares me. And while she's always been a support system, I think it gives you a lot of confidence when you know your family backs you at every statement you make. But I think where gather power from, where I gather strength from, is the people who are in this fight with me, with us together.
Are you okay? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I think it comes from a sense of community. I think the strength doesn't come just from home. The confidence to be able to speak up comes from home, but I think the strength, the need to speak up, the will to go out comes from the people that I'm with. Uh, some, for an example would be the CA protests.
Yeah.
People came out, young people especially came out, even if they didn't have support from their families, because there was support in the community, because there was support outside in the street. And that's where I gather my support from. And these are the people I learn from.
Fair enough. You've written this book, Young and Restless,
Yeah,
on young politicians.
yeah.
Writing that book, do you still want to be somebody who wants to have a political career?
I don't. That's a very deep question you're asking, especially someone who's in like the last semester of their masters, and everyone's thinking about careers and what they're going to do from this point on. I don't know if I'm, I don't know if active electoral politics is something that I would see myself in, but it's not something that I'm also going to say that this is not something for me. Um, but but talking about the book, I've gathered I take a lot of inspiration from everything that the politicians in the book have done so far. And since the publishing of the book, a lot of their lives have changed that I've been able to sit back and see. Um, would I want to be a politician? That's a different thing. But would ask young people to consider politics as a thing they would want to do as a career? I would 100%. I think there's a lot of power. There's a lot of power there to make impact, and almost immediately. And the way I think about the parliament, or the way I think about the assembly, or the way I think about the electoral system, the more the more young people occupy that space, the more our voice is heard. So the more young people get into politics, the more of our concerns are are heard. Like we need to represent ourselves, and we need to get out there and do it. Now, of course, then it becomes like a personal choice. Is it something that you want to do? Is it something that you don't want to do? But I would say, in America, people always, young people, young children, when they ask, "What do you want to be?" It's always encouraged that they say, "I want to be the American, the president of the United States." And I
Yeah.
and I want that, and I think I 100% want that for India. Why I don't Indian politics is very convoluted. It could get extremely unhealthy. And it's something I've realized while I was working on that book, and something I've realized in my years so far. But it's also something you've got to occupy and change.
Yeah. And you've been also wanting to do more advocacy on your return to Oxford. What do you
Mhm.
think about in terms of some of the gender issues that we see here? As I was talking to you earlier, you yourself just alluded, politics, women, tough spaces. Even if you want to sort of claim them,
Yeah,
just want to get a sense as to how women across these spaces need to come together, because advocacy is one space where, if not
yeah,
into politics, then policy tables, that there too women are completely absent at this point.
yeah, yeah. And not just policy tables, even academia. The world that I've been in, it's and Oxford is a very strange space where you back in Delhi, I was living in a space. I was in LSR, which is an all women's college. I've always been taught by my female professors, who are the smartest women that you know. I grew up in a household of just women. So for me, and the support system that I had around me, or the activists that I took inspiration from, were all women. Whether it's Kamla Bhasin, whether it's Aruna Roy, whether it's Sheila, whether it's Arundhati Roy. Um, you in India, you see a lot of female voices, but then you come into this very elite bubble of Oxford, and you realize that the spaces that you think are the spaces that everyone looks up to are so gender imbalanced.
Yeah.
And it really and then it emerges how important it is to call out this gender imbalance, especially in spaces like these, because this almost sets the precedent for the rest of the world. 100%, we need more women. We need more women in academia. We need more uh, women in on policy tables. We need more women in politics. Because who else is then representing our interests? Men aren't.
That's right. Indeed. Gurmehar, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you. And it's been fantastic catching up after a long time. Um,
Yeah,
I'm
same.
glad that your eyes are still eyeing the idea of policy, politics, advocacy. We really need young people to be out there. So when you
Yeah.
come back, give us a shout, and we'll hopefully see you well and all
For
set on
sure.
the other side of coronavirus days.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy we did this. I feel a bit rusty, but I'm so happy we did this. It's been a while since I
We have a
spoke.
practice round, and that's not a bad idea at all. I hope
Perfect.
you're writing another book at some point.
Right now, I'm working on a thesis, on a dissertation, which is way harder than anything I've ever written, including the two books. But hopefully, I should be working on my third project very soon.
Awesome. Do take care.
You
Gurmehar,
too.
thanks very much.
Bye.